My name's Kylie, and I have had the office Christmas ever.
What happens when the character you created becomes more famous, more loved, and ultimately more real than you? In the late 1980s, Australia was swept up in a national obsession. She was sarcastic, nasal, wore a school uniform, and gave zero respect to anyone. Her name was Kylie Mole. A fictional teenage girl played by comedian Mary-Anne Fahey on The Comedy Company, Kylie Mole wasn't just a character. She became a cultural icon. With her signature lingo like "so excellent" and "you're such a spunk," she invaded lounge rooms, schoolyards, and media headlines. She had hit singles, published diaries, and even conducted interviews with international stars. In the blink of an eye, Kylie Mole wasn't just comedy, she was Australia. But there's something darker beneath that funny voice and bowl haircut. Mary-Anne Fahey, the woman behind the phenomenon, began to feel herself disappear. As Kylie Mole soared, Mary-Anne, the writer, the actor, the person, was slowly being erased in the public eye. People didn't ask to meet her. They wanted Kylie. They wanted the joke. Even when the camera stopped rolling, the world still expected her to perform the teenager she had created. She had built a legend, but it would come at a cost. This is the story of how a character devoured its creator, of how fame, once a dream, became a prison, of how Mary-Anne Fahey, one of Australia's brightest comedic minds, was both celebrated and forgotten in the same breath. Behind the laughs, behind the national craze, lies a haunting truth about identity, celebrity, and the high price of creating something unforgettable. Mary-Anne Fahey was already an accomplished performer by the time Kylie Mole was born. Coming from Melbourne, Fahey had built her name through theater, children's television, and sketch comedy. Her comedic instincts razor sharp, her writing deeply clever. But it was in 1988, with the launch of the Comedy Company on Network 10, that everything changed, not just for her, but for Australian television. At a time when local content was struggling to find its voice, the Comedy Company broke through with bold, homegrown humor. Its ensemble cast, including Mark Mitchell, Glenn Robbins, and of course Fahey, offered audiences a brand of sketch comedy that was both absurd and oddly relatable. But amidst all the characters and chaos, one stood out like a bolt of electricity: Kylie Mole. A moody, sarcastic teenager in a gray school uniform, Kylie Mole was unlike anything Australians had seen before. She wasn't polite, she wasn't pretty, she wasn't trying to impress. She was real. Or at least, she felt real. With her hunched posture, nasal twang, and attitude drenched in Gen X apathy, Kylie Mole became an instant sensation. Her catchphrases filtered into everyday language. Teenagers mimicked her. Parents complained about her. The country couldn't stop talking about her. In less than a year, Kylie Mole evolved from a sketch character into a cultural monolith. She released a novelty single titled "So Excellent," which made it into the ARIA charts. A mock diary titled "My Diary" by Kylie Mole was published and flew off the shelves. She was given a spot as a celebrity interviewer on Hey Hey It's Saturday, where she grilled icons like Julian Lennon and INXS, always staying in character, always with the same deadpan bite. But something quietly unsettling began to emerge behind the success. Mary-Anne Fahey's personal identity began to blur with her fictional alter ego. Producers, media executives, and even fans seemed less interested in her and more obsessed with the character she had created. What began as a piece of satire had turned into a national projection, and that projection had a life of its own. People would come up to me on the street and talk to me like I was Kylie, Fahey would later recall. They didn't realize I was acting. As Australia laughed and cheered, few noticed the toll it took on the woman behind the voice. Kylie Mole had become bigger than her creator, and it was only the beginning of a subtle but devastating eclipse. Before Kylie Mole took over Australian television, Mary-Anne Fahey had been steadily carving out her place in the entertainment world. She trained in theater, honed her skills in children's programming, like The Early Bird Show, and proved herself as both a writer and performer in sketch comedy. She was respected among her peers for her quick wit, creative energy, and relentless work ethic. But her success, up until 1988, had been quiet, built behind the scenes, appreciated in circles that valued substance over spectacle. That changed the moment Kylie Mole stepped onto the screen. Kylie Mole didn't just resonate, she exploded. Within weeks of her debut on The Comedy Company, fan mail flooded the studio. Young girls dressed like her. Teen magazines ran mock interviews. Radio stations played her voice clips. Kylie was rebellious but harmless, sarcastic but strangely lovable. In her, Australians saw their daughters, their classmates, their younger selves. She became a symbol of teen disaffection, an accidental voice of a generation that hadn't quite found its way. And Fahey's ability to tap into that struck a deep cultural nerve. Riding the wave of that popularity, the show's producers leaned in. Kylie began to dominate more screen time. The ARIA-charting single So Excellent gave her a surreal presence in the music world. When the satirical diary hit bookstores, it became a cult hit among teenagers. The lines between performance and reality blurred even further when she was invited onto Hey Hey It's Saturday, not as Mary-Anne Fahey, but as Kylie Mole in character, treating celebrities with that trademark teen disdain. It was thrilling at first. But the more successful Kylie became, the more Mary-Anne began to feel displaced. The entertainment industry didn't want Mary-Anne's next creation. They wanted more Kylie. Producers began to pigeonhole her. Writers in the team would pitch around Kylie as if she were a living cast member. And in interviews, Fahey found herself repeatedly asked the same shallow questions, nothing about her creative process, her writing, or her history in theater. Just Kylie. Always Kylie. It wasn't just the industry. The public, too, began to forget the distinction. Children would see her on the street and shout lines from the show. Adults would corner her at events, expecting jokes. "It's like being stuck in a mask," she once said, half laughing, "except people don't want you to take it off." Her other characters, like Japhazine, the wide-eyed country girl, or other sharp satirical roles, went unnoticed. When she tried to branch out to pitch more serious or different work, she was met with confusion or indifference. In their eyes, she was Kylie Mole, and nothing else was quite as marketable. Then came the moment that made it all too clear. Mary-Anne appeared on a panel show as herself, not in character, and the response was muted. The charm, the novelty, the buzz, it was absent. The audience wanted Kylie. They didn't know how to connect to Mary-Anne. The consequences were subtle but brutal. Mary-Anne began withdrawing from the spotlight. Offers dried up, projects stalled. She felt creatively stifled and personally invisible. In the years that followed, her presence in the media became increasingly rare. She had created a character that defined a decade, but in doing so, she lost her own name. The irony is devastating. The very character that launched Mary-Anne Fahey into the national consciousness was also the force that pushed her into obscurity. Behind the cheerful chaos of the comedy company, behind the merchandise, the chart-topping novelty hits, and the television appearances, Mary-Anne was quietly unraveling. In interviews much later, she spoke with raw honesty. Kylie became a monster. I couldn't go anywhere without her shadow following me. At first, it had been exhilarating. The fame, the recognition, the adrenaline of success. But with time, it turned claustrophobic. Even in private moments, she felt watched, judged, expected to perform. Worse still was the emotional cost. As Kylie Mole became a national meme before memes existed, Mary-Anne's deeper ambitions, to write, to create nuanced stories, to be taken seriously as a performer and a woman in comedy, were swallowed whole. She watched as her name was gradually replaced by a persona. Industry executives stopped calling. New shows ignored her. The moment Kylie went out of fashion, it was as if Mary-Anne had gone with her. And then came the silence. After the comedy company ended, there was no grand comeback, no farewell tour, no reflective documentary. There was just absence. Mary-Anne Fahey quietly disappeared from Australian screens. Some assumed she had retired. Others simply forgot. But those closest to her knew. She had been pushed out, not by scandal or failure, but by a success so overwhelming it erased her. Years later, in a rare interview, she revealed how deeply the experience had scarred her. "I was proud of Kylie," she said, "but I wasn't allowed to move on. People didn't want me. They wanted her." That heartbreak, being loved only through a mask, is a pain many performers know, but few survive. Yet what makes her story even more tragic is how little the public remembers. In Australia's collective memory, Kylie Mole remains a quirky footnote of 80s nostalgia. But Mary-Anne Fahey, the mind and heart behind it all, is often left unmentioned. Her contributions to comedy, her pioneering work as a female writer and performer in a male-dominated field, her courage in creating something entirely new, all overshadowed. Behind the scenes, former co-stars have spoken out. She was the brains of the show, one said. But because Kylie was so big, nobody saw the rest of her work. Another reflected, it's like she got trapped in a costume, and when the costume wasn't needed anymore, they threw it and her away. Media outlets barely covered her departure. There was no outrage, no tribute, just a slow fade into cultural forgetfulness. The audience had laughed, quoted, consumed, and moved on. And yet, if you ask anyone from that era to name an iconic Aussie character, many will still smile and say, Kylie Mole. They may not remember who created her, but they remember the voice, the attitude, the presence. That's the cruelest part. There's a quiet cruelty in the entertainment world that rarely gets acknowledged, the tendency to immortalize characters while abandoning the creators who gave them life. In the case of Mary-Anne Fahey, this cruelty is not just evident, it's profound. At Aussie Uncovered, we see Mary-Anne Fahey not merely as the woman who played Kylie Mole, but as a pioneer in Australian comedy. Long before the era of female-led sketch shows or gender-balanced writers' rooms, Fahey was shaping narratives, crafting satire, and daring to create something as strange and subversive as a teen girl who mocked society's norms. Kylie Mole was not just a funny character. She was a cultural critique disguised as adolescent rebellion. And Mary-Anne delivered that critique with surgical precision. It would be too simple to say she was a victim of her own success. That phrase lets the industry, and all of us, off the hook. The truth is, the public and the media eagerly consumed Kylie Mole while systematically discarding the woman behind her. We wanted the voice, the laugh, the joke, but not the depth, not the complexity, not the woman. In our obsession with character, we became complicit in Mary-Anne's erasure. And yet, Mary-Anne never lashed out. She never turned bitter. She never launched a public crusade to reclaim her spotlight. Instead, she quietly stepped away, choosing her peace over a fight she never wanted. That dignity is rare, and perhaps even more tragic. Looking back, what does this story tell us about fame? About identity? About the cost of creating something iconic? When a character becomes a phenomenon, do we owe something more to the creator? Do we remember to separate performance from personhood? Or are we so addicted to symbols that we forget the human hands that built them? Kylie Mole will always be a part of Australia's comedic DNA. But Mary-Anne Fahey deserves more than nostalgic footnotes. She deserves recognition not just as the face behind a character, but as a visionary who understood the power of satire long before it was trendy and paid the price for being ahead of her time. Now we turn the question to you. Do you remember watching Kylie Mole on television? Did you know the woman behind her was quietly disappearing in plain sight? How do you feel about this strange duality of fame and erasure, of laughter and loss? Some legacies shine so brightly, we forget to ask who lit the flame. Kylie Mole still echoes in the memories of those who grew up in Australia's golden age of television. Her slang, her slouch, her sarcasm, they've become relics of a time when local comedy dared to be weird, raw, and wonderfully unpolished. For a brief moment, she was everywhere. In our homes, on our radios, in our schools. She made us laugh, sometimes cringe, and always remember. But behind that school uniform was a woman with a pen, a voice, and a dream far bigger than one character. Mary-Anne Fahey didn't just create a cultural icon, she redefined what Australian comedy could be. Yet as the years passed, her name faded while the myth she created lived on. That is the paradox of genius. Sometimes, the creation becomes immortal while the creator disappears into silence. And maybe, in that silence, there's something hauntingly poetic. Maybe Mary-Anne knew that letting go of Kylie was the only way to reclaim herself. Maybe walking away wasn't a defeat, but an act of defiance, a final, quiet punchline delivered to a world too busy laughing to listen. Today, as we look back, we remember not just the character, but the cost. We see Kylie Mole, and now we also see Mary-Anne Fahey. Because some stories are never told. But now you know. And in knowing, you carry the echo of a voice that once made a nation laugh, and a woman who, for a moment, gave Australia one of its sharpest mirrors.